Today's video is brought to you by Raycon. Go to buyraycon.com/Kendall Rae for 15% off your order. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Happy to have you here again for another true crime video. Today's case is one of the most interesting to me. It is also one of the most annoying to me, and I have many a feeling about it. This one is very controversial, so I'm sure there'll be some, fighting in the comments, and that's fine. You guys can express your opinions there, of course. Today we are talking about a case that's widely known as the staircase. And many of you have probably heard of it. It's a quite popular one. There was a big series called The Staircase that came out on Netflix a few years back. And by big, I mean very, very long. It's like 11 or 12 parts. I have watched the whole thing, even though it really annoys me how long this documentary is. It's absurdly long and doesn't need to be that long at all. I have a lot of feelings about the Staircase documentary that I will share later in this video, but it is what got me interested in this case. And I think if you haven't heard of it, you will find it to be very interesting as well. So maybe you've browsed on Netflix, but you just don't have the 11 plus hours to commit to the Staircase, then I'm going to try to break everything down more simply for you in this video. And before this video starts, I just wanted to give you guys a little reminder to subscribe to my channel, like this video if you enjoyed it, and isn't there another thing? I don't know. I'm supposed to be saying that as a YouTuber. That's what you're supposed to do, and I never say that, so just reminding you. It really does help my channel though, so thank you to everyone who leaves comments, likes my videos, engages with them, shares them. It means a lot to me. So there are quite a few people in this case. There are quite a few names that I'll be bringing up throughout the video, but for the most part, we're gonna be talking about Michael and Kathleen Peterson. So let's start with Kathleen. She was born Kathleen Hunt on February 21st, 1953 in Greensboro, North Carolina. And growing up, Kathleen was very smart. She actually graduated at the top of her class of 473 students at J.P. McCaskey High School in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And Kathleen was also the first woman accepted into the School of Engineering at Duke University, and that was a huge accomplishment for her. While she was at Duke, she earned her Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering and a Master's in Mechanical Engineering, and then went on to work in high-level executive positions at pharmaceutical and IT companies. Kathleen was well-liked. She was a big member of her community as well. She served on the board of the Durham Arts Council and received multiple awards for her leadership skills, and was also a very generous philanthropist. Kathleen married her first husband, Fred Atwater, in 1977, and they had one daughter named Caitlin. And after 10 years of marriage, things kind of fizzled and it wasn't working out for either of them, so they decided to get a divorce. They got divorced in 1985, and Kathleen was perfectly fine being alone at first, but she did get introduced to someone fairly quickly, another dad from her daughter's school, and his name was Michael Peterson. So let's talk about Michael Ivor Peterson. He was born on October 23rd, 1943 near Nashville, Tennessee. He also went to Duke University and graduated with a degree in political science. And then after that, he took some law school classes at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. After college, Michael actually worked as an analyst for the Department of Defense, and he spent most of his time there researching justifications for the US military involvement in Vietnam. In 1965, Michael met his first wife, and her name was Patricia. A few years after meeting Patricia, he ended up joining the Marine Corps and went over and served in Vietnam. But that didn't last long because he was discharged for an injury from a car accident. This injury was pretty bad and left him permanently disabled. So after this, he and his wife moved to Germany, and they really enjoyed living in West Germany. They had two sons, Clayton and Todd, and Patricia worked as a elementary school teacher at the military base. And while she was working there, she ended up meeting this other woman who she became best friends with. And her name was Elizabeth Ratliff. Elizabeth had a husband named George, and they had 2 kids as well, so all of them would spend time together. Their 2 daughters were named Margaret and Martha, and they loved spending time with the Petersons, and they all really got along. George was also a captain in the military, so he and Michael had plenty to talk about, and they really liked each other. But then, unfortunately, George passed away suddenly in 1983. He actually had a heart attack during the US invasion of the island nation of Grenada. It was really shocking to his family, to his daughters, and so the Petersons really stepped up and tried to be there for them as much as possible. And Michael really stepped it up. He was very close with Elizabeth and her daughters. He really tried to step in kind of as a father to them. They really tried to help them out as much as they can to grieve the loss of their dad, to move on with their new life. And just as Margaret and Martha were kind of getting used to life without their dad, their mother suddenly passes away in 1985. The medical examiner determined that Elizabeth died from an intracerebral hemorrhage, secondary to von Willebrand's disease, which is a blood clotting disorder that she did suffer from. And it was just horrific for the girls. They had just lost both parents in the span of a few years. I mean, they were completely devastated. They didn't know what their future was gonna look like at this point. So her body was brought back to the United States and buried in Bay City, Texas. And so now the girls were orphans. So Michael Peterson actually became their legal guardian. Soon after that, Michael's marriage with Patricia started going bad, and they ended up getting a divorce in 1986. And he ended up leaving without his sons. They stayed with Patricia in Germany, and he went back to the United States to start a new life with Margaret and Martha. He moved back to North Carolina, and when he got there, he formally adopted both girls, and then both sons actually ended up joining him over in America. He worked as a columnist for the local Durham Herald-Sun newspaper, where he was known openly for criticizing the police department and going after the district attorney. He also spent time writing about his experience when he was in the military a lot. He wrote multiple military-related novels, and that was always something that just intrigued him and stayed with him throughout his life. And he did pretty well as a writer. Reportedly, I can't confirm this, but I guess he got a $500,000 advance for one of those books, and he also had interest from a Hollywood production company to make a movie out of it, but it never happened. So then, in 1986, Margaret and Martha met a new friend at school named Caitlin Atwater, and they introduced Michael to Caitlin's mom, Kathleen Atwater. And when Kathleen and Michael met, they hit it off instantly. They had a lot in common and seemed to just really click. They started dating, and not much longer after they had met, they asked the kids how they would feel about them all moving in together. And the girls were actually thrilled. This worked out pretty well for them. They're gonna have their friend Caitlin get to move in with them, and they even remember calling it like a permanent sleepover. So in 1989, Kathleen and Caitlin moved in with Michael, Martha, and Margaret, and then they got married years later in 1996. They raised their new Brady Bunch style family in a 9,000 square foot mansion in the Forest Hills neighborhood of Durham, North Carolina. Here's some footage of the house. It's very beautiful, very classic Southern, and it's big. And Michael and Kathleen were said to have had a fairy tale romance. They were completely devoted to each other, totally in love, and dedicated to their children. They had just seamlessly blended their lives and families together, and it worked out perfectly for them. Everyone really got along. They were both successful in their careers and involved in the community. They had a wide circle of friends and loved ones. They just seemed to truly have it all, you know? People who knew the Petersons really liked them. Friends and family, neighbors, they got along with everyone. And like I said, they were very involved in their community. People loved their girls. They loved their story of how the girls were adopted, and they were this blended family, and they all got along so well. Michael was such a good dad. Kathleen was such a good mom. They have this beautiful life. They really had it all. But that all changed on December 9th, 2001. Around 2:40 a.m., Michael called 911 and said that he found Kathleen at the bottom of their back staircase. They had 2 staircases in their house. This was kind of a back way. It was a very small staircase, very confined. We'll look at it more. But he said he just found her there, and he had no idea what happened. So let's go ahead and play the 911 call. Okay, so I am actually recording this part on another day. I did not realize that the Michael Peterson 911 call is copyrighted, and I keep getting the video blocked every time I upload it. So I'm gonna have to just explain it to you and then link it below. However, the only version I found of it on YouTube is just on some random account, and I could see it getting taken down. So the 911 call is in the staircase documentary, if all else fails and you're trying to hear it. I do think it's interesting to hear it, but I'm gonna do my best to just describe it to you. So it's pretty quick, it's pretty short, and Michael definitely sounds panicked, and he doesn't seem to hear the dispatcher super well. There's been a lot of debate over that. Was he trying to not actually answer her questions by seeming confused and panicked, or was he actually confused and panicked? He keeps just saying, please come right away, please come right away. My wife fell down the stairs. And the dispatcher asks how many stairs she fell down, and Michael takes a while to answer that question, but eventually he tells her maybe 15 to 20 stairs. I don't know, just please get here as soon as you can. Michael's son Todd was over at a friend's house, and Michael called him, and he actually came back to the house before the ambulance even got there. And when the first responders did get there, they were shocked. It was an incredibly bloody scene for a fall down the stairs. Kathleen's body was found almost completely out of the staircase. Her upper body, her head was on the landing, but there was so much blood at this crime scene. I'm talking everywhere, all over the walls of the staircase, all the way down to where she was at the landing, kind of pooled there. It really was everywhere. Of course, as soon as they got there, they rushed Kathleen to the hospital, but it was too late. Kathleen died from her injuries. She was only 48 years old. So right off the bat, this obviously seems incredibly strange for her to have died from falling down the stairs. Of course it happens, but normally with much longer staircases. Her actual fall wasn't that far. And with the amount of blood, it seemed like there was just no way that could be generated from just falling down the stairs.
There was just a tremendous amount of blood on her clothing, on the walls, behind her, on the steps, on the face plates of the steps, and on the bottom of her feet.
So how did this happen? How did she take such a brutal fall that it killed her? Michael said that it was a perfectly normal day. He and Kathleen had watched a movie that night. They watched America's Sweethearts, and then afterwards they relaxed by their pool with some drinks, and they were just talking out there, having a good time, when Kathleen decided to go back into the house, and Michael stayed out by the pool. So it's 2 in the morning. Michael's out by the pool alone, and he's smoking his pipe. And it is pretty late, but it's not that weird. People stay up late and smoke and whatever. And he heads in around 2:40 a.m. And that's when he said he stumbled across Kathleen's body. He said he immediately assumed that she had fallen down the stairs and called 911 right away. Investigators did find a bottle of wine and 2 wine glasses at the scene, so that corroborates Michael's story that the 2 of them were drinking and relaxing and hanging out. But they just couldn't get past the sheer amount of blood that was at the scene. It was way more than you would expect from a fall down the stairs. And the more that police started gathering information from Michael about that night, the more they started to question his story. So they collected a bunch of evidence and they started building a case against Michael. And on December 20th, 2001, they finally had enough evidence to charge Michael Peterson with Kathleen's murder. And this was totally shocking to everyone who knew them. People just thought Michael was such a good guy and that they were such a good couple, that they were so in love, that there's no way he would harm her. His kids were absolutely shocked, and they just didn't believe it was true. Michael was also shocked that he was arrested. He said he never thought anyone would think that he killed his wife. So at first, Michael was released on an $850,000 bond, and he had to give up a lot of his possessions, his wallet, his car, even his passport. He wasn't allowed to travel anywhere. He wasn't even allowed to leave the state. And after this, Michael spoke out publicly for the first time.
Kathleen was my life. I whispered her name in my heart 1,000 times. She is there, but I can't stop crying. I would never have done anything to hurt her. I am innocent of these charges, and we will prove it in court.
So at that point, Michael had already been in prison for a month, and you can see in the clip it definitely took a toll on him. He seems very disheveled, very upset, and the public was pretty torn on what to think. I mean, they hadn't heard a lot of the evidence yet, and we will start going over all of that. But just his demeanor and his plea and his reputation with the public made a lot of people think he really was innocent. And a lot of people believe that to this day. So jury selection started in May of 2003, and the trial was set to begin in July. In the lead up to the trial, Michael's friends and family really stood up for him, publicly stated their support for him and that they believed he was innocent. This included his adopted daughters. They really stood strong for their dad, and also his ex-wife Patricia, who was friends with Kathleen. And she just did not think there was any possible way Michael could have done this. She said that she knew Michael was innocent, that he would never hurt Kathleen, that he just wasn't violent like that. She said that he truly loved her and that they would be together forever if she hadn't have passed away. Michael also repeatedly said that he was innocent and said that he would never have wanted to end Kathleen's life. She was the best thing that he had, and he continually talked about the great times that they had over the past 14 years together. So Michael was represented by a Charlotte attorney named David Rudolph. David decided that they would argue that Kathleen had mixed alcohol and the prescription drug Valium, which made her very disoriented and dizzy. And they said that she was actually trying to walk up the stairs, which was a shock to a lot of people, because if you die from a staircase fall, a lot of people are going to assume you fell down and you fell far. But Kathleen actually fell going up, only a few steps up too. They said the staircase is dark, which it is. There's no windows, there's no natural lighting, and this was at night, in the middle of the night. The staircase is really narrow too, kind of closed in, would make me a little claustrophobic almost. And she had flip-flops on, so they said it easily could have caused her to fall. And they actually argued that she fell several times, that after the first fall, she struggled to get up and then fell again. They said she may have even fallen more than that, trying to get up several times, falling again, slipping, and that she hit her head several times, which is what caused her death.
Because falls can happen in a million different ways, with a million different variations. But what I can tell you is that our experts will say that the injuries on Kathleen Peterson's body, not just the lacerations, but the bruises, all can be explained as consistent with this fall.
The defense got a man named Henry Lee to assist in their case, and he's a blood spatter analysis and forensic expert. And after he looked at everything, he concluded that Kathleen's injuries were the result of a tragic accidental fall and that the volume of blood at the scene was irrelevant. He said that she was bleeding profusely from the injuries on her head, and she was also coughing up blood at the same time. And this guy is very controversial. He has been involved in several high-profile cases and has an interesting reputation. And during court, he actually did something very strange. The dude brought out some ketchup and showed what it would be like if you had blood in your mouth and you were to cough. And he showed what that blood spatter would look like to explain all the blood on the wall. And a lot of people did not like that he did this. They thought it was pretty disrespectful, honestly, and not a real scientific method for court. The prosecution completely disagreed with this. And when you see Kathleen's injuries, it makes everything even more confusing, because it turns out Kathleen had multiple head lacerations, almost as if something or someone scratched her or she was hit with some type of object. But it was strange because there were no bruises on her arms or her legs. And Michael kept pushing the idea that Kathleen was drinking a lot that night. But when they did her blood alcohol test, it came back that she was not drunk. She was actually at 0.07% blood alcohol level. So definitely not drunk. Drinking, but not drunk. As most of you know, at that point, you're actually legally still allowed to drive. It's not until you hit 0.08% that you cannot legally drive. The autopsy report showed that she had a total of 7 deep lacerations on the top and back of her head, which were likely caused by repeated blows from a light, rigid object. She also had a fracture of the thyroid neck cartilage, which indicates an intense pressure on the neck, like possible strangulation. And another thing is when first responders first got there, most of the blood around Kathleen had completely dried, meaning she was probably there for quite a bit, which of course Michael said he was out smoking the pipe by the pool. But the neurons in her brain showed that she was alive and unconscious for at least 90 minutes, if not up to 2 hours before she actually died. So she was just lying there for a while. And that data just completely conflicts with Michael's statement that he was out by the pool for only 40 minutes after she went inside. And the medical examiner, Deborah Radish, actually ruled Kathleen's death a homicide, and this was huge.
At the end of the autopsy examination, taking into account the number of scalp lacerations, their locations, their orientation, together with the neck injury, the findings were unequivocal that this was not from a fall down the stairs. And the fact that she was found at the bottom of the stairs would indicate either that's just a coincidence or she was there for a reason, perhaps to make somebody think that she had fallen down the stairs.
So obviously her wounds are incredibly strange for a staircase fall. I feel like we can all agree to that. It probably wasn't just the staircase. There had to be some other element to her death. And the prosecution actually presented the idea that it could have been a blow poke from a fireplace. It turns out that the couple owned this custom, very nice blow poke that sat next to their fireplace. And this is to kind of like, stoke the wood. This was a gift from Kathleen's sister. It was something that was important to them, and oddly enough, it was missing from their home. But the defense argued that since there was no skull fracture found in the autopsy report, that there was no way that she could have died from being beaten to death. But the autopsy was just the beginning of the evidence that the prosecution planned to share during the trial. Now, the prosecution, not the greatest, I'll just say that, but one of their primary goals was to establish that Michael was a liar in order to hurt his credibility with the jury. So the first thing that they brought up was that Michael had previously lied about his military accomplishments. Years earlier, Michael had run for mayor, and while he was running, he would go around saying that he was awarded 2 Purple Hearts, one of them for being hit by shrapnel from a landmine explosion in Vietnam. He had a whole story about it. But it turns out he made all of that up. According to the military records, he had been awarded a Silver Star and a Bronze Medal with Valor, but no Purple Hearts. And like we talked about earlier, his injury was caused from a car accident that was not at all related to serving in the military. So right there in court, they proved that he was willing to lie about something as big as that. And Michael even admitted in court that sometimes he lied because it made things easier.
It's easier. It was just easier sometimes to let the lie come out.
Next, the prosecution needed to show that Michael had lied on the night of Kathleen's death. And the evidence that they brought up for this was that the wine glasses that were sitting out that Michael said they were using to drink earlier were never touched by Kathleen. There were no fingerprints from Kathleen on either wine glass. And they also brought in their own blood spatter analysis to counteract what Harvey Lee had said. His name was Dwayne Deaver. He's a blood spatter analyst with North Carolina's State Bureau of Investigation, and he said that the blood spatter on the walls and around the staircase were caused by someone lifting the murder weapon over and over while bludgeoning Kathleen to death, not from her coughing up blood.
In other words, something contacted the wall with blood on it, made smears in here, and then another impact occurred, creating another stain which came across the top of that. The stains on these pants are consistent with impact spatter with the result of a forceful impact, and that the individual wearing these pants at the time of that impact was in close proximity to the source of blood when it was impacted.
So of course, they also have to show motive. They have to prove why Michael would want to kill his beautiful wife, Kathleen, who he loved so much. They had this great life. Why would he want to ruin all of that?
If the prosecution is correct, how do we go from soulmate and lover to cold-blooded murderer? How does that happen?
So to start, they dropped a big bombshell in court. They had evidence that Michael was bisexual and that he was having an affair on Kathleen with another man. Investigators had discovered over 2,000 photos of men on his computer, and they also found a conversation between Michael and this 26-year-old male escort named Brent Walgamont, and they actually brought him in to testify in court.
What types of services did you perform?
Oh, wow, that's pretty broad. Basically, it's a companionship for other males of legal age.
And did that involve sexual activities?
Sometimes it does.
Okay, what types of sexual activity, sir?
Oh, just about anything under the sun.
It turns out that the two of them had been talking for at least 4 months before Kathleen's death. And from what we know, it was all online, but they had been planning to meet up in person soon. And it turns out that the night Kathleen died, she had gotten on Michael's computer just a few hours before. And this isn't something she normally did, but she had to prep for a conference call the next day, so she had asked Michael to use his computer. She asked him for his password, and she got on there. And who knows what she saw. And not only that, Michael had actually printed out pages of conversations with this escort talking about where they planned to meet, what sexual acts they planned to do, and he literally printed it and left it in his desk drawer where Kathleen could have easily found it that night. So they theorized that Kathleen had found all of that while she was on the computer, that she discovered that Michael was cheating on her. They presented the idea that maybe she came to him angry and they got in a fight over his affair. At some point, maybe this fight got violent and Michael beat Kathleen to death and then staged everything at the bottom of the staircase. Now, one of the district attorneys on the prosecution that really tried to emphasize and sensationalize his sexuality during the case was attorney Fredra Black. She seemed just determined to cause a huge scandal about his secret gay life. But Michael claimed that Kathleen was aware that he was bisexual and that she was okay with it. But that doesn't mean that she was okay with him having an affair. The defense even argued, though, that why would he print out conversations and leave them in the desk or let her on his computer if he was hiding all of this stuff? So the next motive that they introduced was financial, and this is where shit gets really dicey. It turns out that the two of them were in about $143,000 worth of debt, and they were headed for big financial trouble.
They were basically having to live month to month on credit cards. She was on the edge of losing her job. All those things combined, from a financial perspective, we thought caused significant stress in that home.
Kathleen's salary at the time was $145,000 a year, but that year she deferred a lot of it and her company was laying off a lot of people. Michael, on the other hand, hadn't had a steady income in years. His writing career really never took off like he wanted it to. And then they found out that their sons, Michael and Patricia's sons, were also in quite a bit of debt. They actually pulled out emails of Patricia and Michael talking about their son's debt, and in one of those emails, Michael said that he had to keep this a secret from his wife. And of course, it turns out that Kathleen had a huge life insurance policy.
First of all, the amount available to Mr. Peterson upon Ms. Peterson's death would have been what?
$1,834,166.
But of course, before he could get that payout, he had to make sure that Kathleen's death looked like an accident. And the prosecution argued that he actually got this idea years earlier when he was living in Germany with his first wife. And this is where shit gets wild. So just a reminder, Michael and his first wife, Patricia, who he's friendly with now, they have 2 kids together. They used to live in Germany, like I said at the beginning of the video, and they had a friend named Elizabeth Ratliff who died suddenly in 1985. And then Michael adopted her daughters when she passed away and they moved back to the States. And Elizabeth had a sister. Her name was Margaret Blair. And when she heard how Michael's second wife, Kathleen, died falling down the stairs, she had to contact authorities. It turns out that there were a lot of similarities between the way that Kathleen died and the way that Elizabeth died. So let's talk a little bit more about how Elizabeth actually died. According to her sister Margaret, Elizabeth and her daughters had dinner at the Peterson house that night, and then they came home. Michael actually walked them home, and then he was seen by another neighbor later that night running from their house. The next morning, they found Elizabeth dead at the bottom of her staircase, just like Kathleen. And she was actually found by the girl's nanny, who was named Barbara. And get this, she also had lacerations to the back of her head that looked exactly like Kathleen's. In the weeks leading up to Elizabeth's death, she had been suffering from pretty severe headaches. So the medical examiner just concluded that she had an intracerebral hemorrhage, and that caused her to collapse and fall down the stairs. Her death was investigated by the German police and also the US military police. And at the time, no one thought there was any way